All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome. We are doing our coaching call today on our FY22 Arts Education Project grant application. I'm Amber Westbrook with the South Carolina Arts Commission grants team. We also have Kathy Lee with us. She's our grants manager. We have Laurel Posey with us, Director of Communications. And we also have, of course, Catherine Ntube, our Specialist for Arts Organizations and Education, who will be presenting. Alrighty. So, Catherine, take it away.
Thanks, Amber. So I'm imagining that there are folks in the room who have applied before and have a pretty strong sense of what the grant is, and also folks in the room or watching the recording who are just exploring this grant for the first time. So I'll start first with a basic sort of overview. I'll walk through what the grant guidelines and application preview looks like on the webpage, and give a couple of basic tips and pointers, and then we'll have some time at the end for more specific questions if they arise. So hopefully it'll be good both for folks who have done this before and have specific questions, and for folks who are learning about it for the first time. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And maximize it so we can see it. Hopefully. Try that again so we can actually see it. There we go. Cool. So the Arts Education Project Grant is designed to support quality arts education programs, both in traditional arts education settings, so schools and universities, and through other organizations like nonprofits that utilize the arts to advance learning in children. This year, the grant deadline is March 5th. It's already open. It opened on the 4th of January, so it's already accessible for you to start an application or preview an application. It's one of our grant categories that's open to the largest sort of set of organizations. So schools and school districts can apply, nonprofit organizations, both arts specific organizations and non-arts organizations that run arts ed programs. Colleges and universities and units of government are all eligible to apply. The application that's due on March 5th is for the grant period essentially of next school year. So July 2021 through June 2022. If you have a summer program or a specific concern about your project fitting within that timeline, you can shoot me an email and we can talk about the best way to proceed. The funding amount for this category is up to $15,000. So this year, grant awards averaged around $12,000. You don't have to have a massive, massive project to apply in this category. We also fund smaller scale projects. And the match for this grant is 1-to-1. What that means is for every dollar that the Arts Commission contributes toward the education project, the organization should contribute $1 as well. If the workshop costs $12,000 total to run, we might contribute up to $6,000 and the organization would contribute $6,000 as well. The sorts of projects that have historically been funded, for example, not an exhaustive list, symphonies, orchestras, and theater organizations, youth organizations like the Boys and Girls Club and the Girl Scouts, cultural centers and arts councils, museums and universities have all had funded AEP projects in the past 2 years. Projects include, for example, again, not exhaustive, after school and summer arts education programs, STEAM education programs, student created public arts exhibits, student arts festivals. And in general, projects that involve direct student engagement with the production of artworks or the use of arts-based learning strategies perform a little bit better than projects with a solely passive arts experiences. What I mean by that is if a music organization is going to have 3 performances with a student audience, they might not perform as well in the grant application process as a music organization that has that performance component and also is working with music teachers at local schools to have a complementary lesson component in the classroom, if that makes sense. I'll take us to the website so that everyone can see what the grant guidelines look like on the webpage and the application preview as well. A lot of this I've already kind of summarized. So the purpose of the grant, who or what types of organizations are eligible to apply. I don't want to literally read all of this out, but it is a very, very good idea to fully read the entirety of the grant guidelines before you apply. All organizations that apply must have a DUNS number. School districts or schools can use their school district DUNS number. They don't have to register separately. There are a couple of restrictions for this category. So schools cannot receive both ABC Advancement Grant Funds and Arts Education Project Grant Funds in the same year. So if your school is an ABC certified school for fiscal year 22, you're not eligible for this grant category. If your school is within a district that's receiving a district arts grant, you are eligible to apply still. Individual artists are not eligible to apply in this category. And then if your school is already the program site for another arts education project. So if the Boys and Girls Club is applying to this grant to host an after-school program at your school could not be double funded to run a separate program. So your school could not also apply for an arts education project grant in the same year. Only one application per deadline, and college and university departments are eligible, but can only submit one application per department. I gave some examples of the ways that funds can be used, and there's also a list here on the webpage of ways that funds can be used. One note, if you are hiring artists if you're contracting artists to work as part of your project for this grant, starting this fiscal year, so this grant application, those individual artists should be members of the SC Arts Directory. If they're going to be directly instructing students, we do recommend, but don't require, that they have the additional certification so that they appear as certified teaching artists on the directory. That's not a DOE certification or a Department of Ed certification. But it does mean that they've gone through an extra round of vetting. So they submitted sample lesson plans, letters of recommendation directly related to their competencies as a teaching artist. You can also, if your project is working with students with disabilities, you can search the directory for Arts Access teaching artists that have trained with Arts Access SC specifically to work with those populations. And the link to search for artists on the directory is available directly from the guidelines. We are requiring that any activities align with state guidelines regarding COVID-19. So if whatever guidelines for sanitation, for masks, we expect activities to abide by those guidelines. We're going to talk a little bit more about priority areas in just a minute, but you can also see what types of projects are prioritized, and you can also see the grant deadline and the match requirements that we talked about earlier. From the, another pretty cool feature from the guidelines page is you can actually preview the application. You don't have to create an account in Foundant. You don't have to register if you've never registered before. You can preview directly from here. You can see all of the open applications. So I just searched for education to pull this one up, and I'll click preview. So you can see that the grant application is divided up into several different sections. There are some sections that are basically background information. So your organization name, DUNS number, things like that. And then there are a few narrative sections. So one specifically about your project and one specifically about your organization. It is really important in these sections that you provide as much detail as possible, because the evaluation panel that's going to be considering your grant won't have access to any other information about your organization. So they won't be perusing your website. They might not be familiar even with the region or city that you're operating within. So the more detail that you can provide in the narrative sections, the better. And then the organizational capacity section will ask you questions about like your organization's mission, the personnel or the key figures that will be working on the project and things like that. There's also a section where you will be uploading a budget for this project. We do ask that you upload a complete project budget, so not just the amount that leads up to the grant match, but the total cost of the project. So even if it's a $100,000 project, submit the total project budget rather than just the portion that matches the $15,000 that you're applying for. Okay, I'll stop sharing my screen and check to see if there are, okay, no questions yet. So that's what the grant application guidelines and preview section looks like on the webpage. I do have a couple of basic tips and pointers, and then I can also overview what the application process and the timeline for when you'll figure out you'll be funded looks like. So reading the guidelines and application before starting is really important. It is really rough to start an application and do a lot of work and then realize that it's not actually a good fit for your organization. Similarly, it can be really useful to read all of the questions that will appear in a section so that you know as you're filling in the answers, what's up, what's coming up, and you can focus your responses and not accidentally start answering questions in one field that are going to be answered or asked later. I mentioned this earlier, the more thorough and detailed you can be, the more information the evaluators will have and the more organized and competent the organization will appear. And then, and Grants can maybe talk more about this if folks have specific questions about this afterwards, but there's a collaborator feature that you can use within the application so that more than one person at your organization can view, edit, or submit the grant. So if you are working on the narrative portion, but you'd like someone else to submit the budget upload, you can add them as a collaborator, maybe only give them the ability to view and edit. And once you've seen that they've added the budget, you can submit it yourself. You can always decide whether a collaborator is able to view, edit, and submit, or only one level of those things. Okay, so another common question that folks ask is how applications are evaluated. You can access this information in greater detail at the bottom of the grants guidelines page, but I've just summed up here. These are the things that folks will be looking for as they're evaluating your application. 40% of their evaluation will be dedicated to looking at how you expand access to arts education. So are your educational goals clear and the way that you're going to reach them and measure them clear? Does the project directly engage students in artistic production or arts-based learning? Your organizational capacity. Does the organization have a clear timeline? Do you write something like this will happen in the spring between March and April, or is there a week-by-week breakdown, a sense that there's a clarity of the dates and times and places that the program will occur? Do you have a balanced budget, and do you have adequate planning and personnel to run the project? 5%, do you demonstrate an understanding of the populations you'll be serving, how many students will benefit, what specific needs they may have, and how you'll meet them? And then I mentioned earlier that I'd talk a little bit about priority areas. So for this grant, we do prioritize in 3 ways. So projects that involve partnerships between schools, nonprofits, or other entities to meet student needs. So if your nonprofit is partnering with 2 specific school sites, you would get priority points for that partnership category. Does the project serve students in a priority population? So for example, students in rural or high poverty areas. Other priority populations include students with disabilities, students living in or involved with institutions like foster care institutions, Or are you serving students living in an Opportunity Initiative county? And that exact list is included in the grant application and on the grant guidelines. In recent years, the majority of, but not all, funded projects met one or more priority areas. So it's not required that you meet one of these areas to receive a grant. On average, the majority of applications do. And often it's the serving students in a priority population priority point that folks will get, but it's not required. Each of the last couple of years, there have been projects that didn't meet any of the priority areas. So after you apply, there's a long process that your application will go through. Once you've finished it, it has a whole other journey to go through. The grants team first will review it and just determine that it's complete, that you've met the eligibility requirements, that you've uploaded everything that you needed to upload. Then a review panel of arts professionals will evaluate and score the application based on that criteria that I just shared. So it's not going to be me and Kathy and Amber in a room just looking at these and deciding where to distribute money. There'll be an external panel that reviews the grants. Once they've reviewed the grants and given us their recommendations, we will develop funding recommendations based on those evaluations and the availability of funds. We'll present these to the Arts Commission Board of Commissioners and they'll approve it. And then after the June 2021 board meeting is when award notification will occur. So there is that couple of months window between when you submit your application on March 5th and when you will receive notification of funding. The board has to approve them before we notify you. If I am going to take questions immediately after I close this presentation out, but if you realize afterwards, or if you're not watching this live, you're watching the recording, if you have any questions pre-app, so am I a good fit? How might I think about my project timeline? I'm trying to think through these things with my organization. You can direct those to me at cntube@arts.sc.gov. And if you have tech questions, like I can't seem to get logged into the application, or post-application questions, then you direct those to grants@arts.sc.gov. Okay, so that's the conclusion of the official. I hope I've not overwhelmed you. I hope that that seemed at least somewhat helpful. Are there any questions about the grant, the application process, the timeline, anything like that? We're feeling pretty confident. If you do realize, what I can do is we can maybe go ahead and stop recording, and then I can see as if there are questions that are specific to folks' organizations that I could answer in the time that we have left. But for folks who are watching the recording, thanks for watching. If you have any questions, feel free to email me or the grants team. And I hope this was helpful in deciding whether or not it was a good fit to apply.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Catherine.